The night I stopped hiding didn't feel brave. It felt inevitable, like a truth that had grown too heavy to carry quietly. I remember standing alone in my room, lights low, the house asleep, my pulse loud enough to feel like company. The mirror across from me caught a sliver of my reflection, just enough to remind me that I had been avoiding it on purpose. Avoiding myself. For years, I'd learned how to disappear in plain sight. I wore the right expressions, used the right tone, laughed at the right moments. From the outside, I was steady, predictable, easy to understand. Inside, though, there was a constant negotiation. How much of myself could surface without consequences? Every night ended the same way, with the part of me that wanted softness folding itself back into silence. That night was different because I didn't rush. I let the quiet stretch. I opened the drawer I rarely acknowledged and touched the fabric there like it might vanish if I startled it. The texture alone sent a wave through me. Familiar, grounding, unmistakably real. I wasn't chasing a thrill. I was answering a call I'd been pretending not to hear. As I changed, each movement felt ceremonial, deliberate. Not secretive, intentional. My hands trembled, not with shame, but with the weight of what this meant. I wasn't dressing up to escape who I was. I was dressing to meet her. The mirror waited, patient as ever, reflecting only fragments until I was ready to look fully. When I finally raised my eyes, the reflection held me steady. I saw fear there, yes, but also relief. A softness I'd buried. A posture that felt more honest than anything I'd practiced. My breath slowed. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was pretending. I felt like I was remembering. The room seemed to exhale with me, as if it had been holding this secret too. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice said, "This is what hiding was costing you." And once that thought landed, I knew there was no turning back. Not tonight, not ever in the same way again. I stayed there longer than I meant to, suspended between who I had been and who I was allowing myself to be. The mirror didn't demand answers. It offered recognition. That was new. Usually reflection felt like confrontation, a list of things to fix or suppress. Now it felt like a quiet witness, holding space while I caught up to myself. I took a step closer and noticed details I'd never let myself notice before. The way my shoulders softened when I stopped forcing them back, the way my face relaxed when I wasn't bracing for judgment. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, and somehow that made it more powerful. This wasn't transformation by spectacle. It was alignment by honesty. A flicker of fear cut through the calm. What happens if this doesn't stay contained? What happens when night turns into morning? I imagined daylight spilling into the room. Imagined voices, expectations, the weight of being seen. My chest tightened, and for a moment I considered undoing everything, folding the fabric away, restoring the familiar distance. But my hands didn't move. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to my own breathing. I realized how exhausted I was, not physically but emotionally, from years of editing myself. Hiding takes effort. Silence takes strategy. And in that moment, still dressed, still visible to myself, I felt the first real rest I could remember. A song drifted faintly from my phone, one I'd played 100 times before but never really heard. The rhythm matched my breathing, grounding me. I let it play, letting the sound stitch the moment together. This wasn't rebellion. It was relief. When I stood again, the mirror showed someone steadier than before. Not fearless, just resolved. I didn't know what tomorrow would ask of me, but I knew what tonight had already given me. Proof. Proof that I could stop hiding and still be whole. And once you feel that kind of wholeness, even briefly, it changes the shape of every choice that follows. The clock on my phone glowed softly, reminding me that time was moving forward whether I was ready or not. Midnight slipped past unnoticed. I thought about how many nights I'd spent bargaining with myself. Just this once, just for a minute, no one has to know. Tonight there was no bargaining. There was only presence. I was here fully, and that felt quietly radical. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. The street was empty, washed in amber light, ordinary and calm. Seeing the world continue as usual steadied me. Nothing had shattered because I'd chosen honesty, at least not yet. The fear I'd rehearsed so carefully didn't arrive on cue. Instead, there was a gentle hum of anticipation, like standing backstage before a performance you actually want to give. My thoughts turned inward, tracing old memories I usually avoided. Moments from childhood when I'd felt a pull toward softness and quickly learned to tuck it away. Compliments I'd deflected. Curiosity I'd labeled as something else so I wouldn't have to examine it. Standing there now, I felt compassion for that younger version of me, so careful, so afraid of getting it wrong. I wished I could tell them that curiosity wasn't a flaw. It was a map. Back at the mirror, I practiced saying my name aloud. It sounded the same, yet different, as if it carried less weight when spoken without armor. I tried a smile, an unguarded one, and watched it reach my eyes. That startled me more than anything else. I hadn't realized how rarely I smiled without calculation. Doubt returned, quieter but persistent. Is this enough? Is this real or just a moment? I didn't have answers, and for once I didn't force them. I reminded myself that truth doesn't require certainty to exist. It only asks to be acknowledged. As I turned off the light and let the room settle into darkness, I felt a calm determination take root. Whatever tomorrow brought, this night had already done its work. It had shown me that hiding was a habit, not a destiny, and habits can change. Sleep came in pieces, but it wasn't restless. Each time I drifted off, I returned to the same feeling. Grounded, present, unmistakably awake inside myself. When morning finally pressed against the curtains, I didn't bolt upright with regret the way I'd expected. I lay there, listening to the house breathe, and noticed something startling. I wasn't scrambling to erase the night. I was carrying it with me. Getting out of bed felt different. Not dramatic, just intentional. I caught my reflection in the mirror again, this time in daylight, and felt a ripple of fear quickly chased by resolve. Daylight has a way of telling the truth. It showed me tired eyes, yes, but also a steadiness I hadn't seen before. I didn't rush to change. I let myself exist for a few minutes longer, honoring the courage it took to stay. As the day unfolded, I moved through it with a heightened awareness, like every sense had been tuned a notch sharper. Conversations sounded louder. Expectations felt closer. I noticed how often I used to shrink myself without thinking, how automatic the hiding had become. Catching those moments felt like waking up mid-step and choosing a new direction. There were flickers of doubt, quick, sharp, familiar. But each one meant something new: memory. The memory of standing in that quiet room, choosing honesty over habit. That memory became a touchstone. Whenever fear rose, I returned to it and felt my footing steady again. By afternoon, I understood something important. The night hadn't changed everything, but it had changed me. And change, once begun, has a way of insisting on being acknowledged. I didn't know what that acknowledgement would look like yet. I only knew I wasn't willing to pretend it hadn't happened. The mirror caught me one last time before evening, and I met my own gaze without flinching. I wasn't hiding anymore, not from myself. By evening, the weight of the choice settled into something steadier. Less adrenaline, more resolve. I realized how often I'd mistaken fear for instinct, how many times I'd turned away simply because turning back felt safer. That night had redrawn the map. Now, when I felt the familiar pull to retreat, I recognized it for what it was: habit tugging at the hem of my courage. I moved slowly as I prepared, paying attention to how my body responded when I stopped rushing. The mirror reflected a calm that felt earned, not borrowed. I noticed how small decisions, how I stood, how I breathed, added up to a posture that felt honest. The song from the night before played again, softer this time, less a lifeline and more a reminder. It told me where I'd been and where I was choosing to go. Outside, the world met me with its usual mix of indifference and attention. A glance here, a nod there. Nothing catastrophic. That surprised me. I'd spent years bracing for a reckoning that never quite arrived. Instead, there were moments of simple humanity. Being asked a question, sharing a smile, moving through space without apology. Each moment stitched confidence into me, one quiet thread at a time. There was a stumble, of course. An old reflex snapped my shoulders tight, my voice cautious. Shame flickered, but it didn't linger. I caught it, breathed, and let it pass. The mirror, found later in a reflective storefront, showed me the recovery, not the stumble. That mattered more. As the day closed, I felt a new kind of tiredness, the good kind, the kind that follows effort aligned with truth. I understood then that stopping hiding wasn't a single act. It was a practice. One I could return to again and again with patience. The next few days taught me that visibility has layers. You don't go from hidden to seen all at once. You learn how to let light in without flinching. I practiced that quietly. I noticed how my choices aligned when I listened inward instead of scanning the room for permission. The mirror became less of a verdict and more of a conversation. Some mornings it asked for patience. Some evenings it offered reassurance. I learned to answer both. There were social moments that tested me. A gathering where old expectations lingered in the air like perfume. I felt them brush against me, familiar and heavy. My heart sped up, and for a second I considered slipping back into the old shape. Easier, quieter, less risky. Instead, I grounded myself in the memory of that night, the first night I stayed. I stood where I was and breathed until my pulse slowed. No speech. No announcement. Just presence. Something unexpected happened then. People met me where I stood. Not everyone, not perfectly, but enough. A conversation flowed without friction. A smile landed and stayed. I realized how often I'd confused anticipation with certainty. Fear predicts. Reality responds. And reality, more often than not, was gentler than my fears. At home, alone again, I put the song on and let it play all the way through. It sounded different now, less urgent, more affirming. I watched my reflection sway slightly with the rhythm. A softness in the movement that felt unforced. The mirror reflected a person who was learning how to be kind to themselves in real time. I went to bed that night with a quiet pride. Not because everything was solved, but because I hadn't disappeared when it mattered. The practice was working. I was still here. I started to notice how much energy I'd reclaimed. Without the constant self-editing, my mind felt clearer. My movements less tense. I laughed more easily, small genuine laughs that surprised me when they escaped. The mirror caught those moments and held them. Proof that ease wasn't something I had to earn through perfection. It arrived when I stopped fighting myself. There were still moments of friction. A comment that landed oddly. A look that made me second-guess. Each time I felt the old reflex flare. Shrink, smooth, vanish. And each time I chose something different. Sometimes it was a breath. Sometimes it was a pause. Sometimes it was simply staying put. The smallest acts felt monumental because they rewired patterns I'd carried for years. One afternoon, I caught myself humming the song without realizing it. That stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't a coping mechanism anymore. It was a soundtrack. I smiled, realizing how far that meant I'd come. Music has a way of marking time, of turning memory into movement. This one marked the shift from secrecy to steadiness. At night, I stood before the mirror and tried to articulate what had changed. The reflection didn't need explanations. It showed me the evidence instead. Eyes clearer, posture settled, a face no longer braced for impact. I felt a swell of gratitude, for the night that started this, for the courage that kept showing up, for the patience I was learning to extend to myself. I turned off the light knowing the path ahead wouldn't be straight. But it was mine. And I was walking it without hiding. The next test arrived quietly, the way real tests usually do. A simple invitation. A casual gathering. Nothing dramatic on the surface, which somehow made it heavier. I stood in my room with the mirror watching. The song paused in my head like it was waiting for my decision. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about choosing whether to show up as the version of me that had been growing stronger, or retreat to the old outline that felt safer because it was familiar. I dressed slowly, not with nerves this time but with intention. Each choice felt like a sentence in a letter I was finally writing to the world. The mirror reflected a calm I didn't recognize at first. Not excitement. Not fear. Something steadier. Readiness. I touched the glass lightly, a quiet ritual now, and whispered a promise I didn't need to hear out loud. Outside, the air felt different against my skin, as if it noticed the shift before anyone else could. Every step forward carried a hum of awareness. People passing, voices overlapping, life continuing as it always had. And yet, I felt newly visible, not because others were staring but because I wasn't shrinking. I was present inside my own body, occupying it fully for once. There were moments when doubt flickered, quick and sharp like static. A passing glance. A question asked a second too slowly. I let those moments pass through instead of lodging in my chest. I answered kindly. I smiled when it felt right. I didn't perform. I simply existed. And to my surprise, the world met me there without protest. Later, alone again, I returned to the mirror. The song resumed, soft and familiar. I realized something then that landed with a quiet force. Courage hadn't arrived all at once. It had been accumulating choice by choice, breath by breath. Tonight was just another layer added. Another truth held without apology. I turned away from the reflection not because I needed distance, but because I finally trusted it would still be there. Sleep didn't come easily that night, not because of anxiety, but because my mind kept replaying small moments I hadn't realized mattered until they were over. The way my name had been spoken without hesitation, the ease of laughter that hadn't felt forced, the absence of that old inner flinch, the one that used to brace for impact even in silence. Lying there in the dark, I understood that something irreversible had shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but permanently. Morning light crept in like a gentle question. I stood before the mirror again, hair still imperfect, eyes slightly tired, and felt an unexpected swell of tenderness. I wasn't looking for approval anymore. I was checking in. The reflection met me halfway, familiar now, like a friend who knew my history and didn't need it explained. I played the song quietly, letting it fill the room without overpowering it, and for the first time, I heard it as background rather than instruction. The day brought ordinary tasks, errands, messages, conversations that had nothing to do with identity on the surface. Yet underneath everything there was a hum of alignment. When someone spoke to me, I listened without calculating how I was being perceived. When I spoke, my voice felt anchored, not borrowed. Even moments of awkwardness didn't sting the way they used to. They passed harmless like weather. Still, not everything was light. A comment overheard. A look that lingered too long. The old fear tried to reclaim space, reminding me that acceptance isn't guaranteed, that the world can be sharp without warning. I let myself feel the ache without feeding it. Strength, I was learning, didn't mean being unaffected, it meant staying open anyway. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I caught my reflection in a window instead of a mirror. Softer. Less controlled. More real. I smiled before I realized I was doing it. Not because I felt brave, but because I felt honest. And honesty, it turned out, was its own kind of shelter. The days that followed didn't announce themselves as milestones, but they stacked quietly, one on top of another, building something solid beneath my feet. I started noticing how often I used to rehearse my reactions before anything even happened, and how little I did that now. The mirror became less of a checkpoint and more of a companion. I still stood there sometimes, adjusting small details, but the urgency was gone. I wasn't trying to convince myself anymore. I was just arriving. One afternoon, I found myself in a familiar space with unfamiliar ease. Conversations drifted around me, casual and unguarded, and I realized no one was watching me the way I used to watch myself. That awareness hit like a quiet revelation. I had been my own loudest critic all along. The world hadn't changed as much as my posture within it had. I took up space differently now, still gently but without apology. There were moments when the past tapped me on the shoulder. Old memories, old rules, old versions of myself asking if this was temporary, if I'd wake up and retreat again. I didn't push them away. I listened, thanked them for trying to protect me, and let them go. Growth, I learned, wasn't about erasing who I was. It was about updating the story I told myself about who I could be. That evening, the song played again, almost by accident this time. I didn't stop what I was doing. I didn't sit and reflect. I just let it exist alongside me like background light. And in that ordinary moment, folding time into routine, I felt something profound settle in my chest. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't pretending. This was life continuing. As I turned off the lights and prepared for sleep, a thought surfaced, steady, unafraid, and clear. I wasn't hiding anymore, but more importantly, I wasn't searching either. I had found myself somewhere in the middle, and it felt like home. The next morning carried a different kind of quiet, the kind that feels earned. I woke up before the alarm, sunlight slipping through the curtains like it had something to confess. For years, mornings were negotiations. Who do I need to be today? What version of myself will cause the least friction? But this time there was no bargaining. Just breath. Just presence. I caught my reflection again, not searching for flaws or proof, but noticing how calm my eyes looked. That alone felt new. Outside, the world went on with its usual indifference, and somehow that was comforting. I walked through familiar places with an unfamiliar steadiness, aware of my steps, my voice, the way I carried myself. There was still vulnerability there. I don't think that ever disappears, but it wasn't fear-driven anymore. It was honest vulnerability, the kind that says, this is me and I'm still standing. A small moment caught me off guard. Someone said my name. Not with curiosity, not with hesitation, just naturally. It landed softly like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. I felt a brief sting behind my eyes, not from sadness but from relief. I hadn't realized how much energy it took to brace for impact all the time. To expect questions. To expect doubt. That expectation had quietly loosened its grip. Later, alone again, I thought about the idea of pretending, the word that once defined this journey. I had believed I was borrowing something, stepping into a role that wasn't mine. But the truth unfolded slowly, gently. Pretending had been the disguise. This, whatever this was, felt real because it had always been waiting. The mirror reflected that back to me now, not as a challenge but as confirmation. As evening approached, the song returned one last time that day. I didn't need it, but I welcomed it. It had become a marker, a thread tying together who I was and who I am becoming. And standing there, balanced between memory and momentum, I realized there was only one part of the story left to face. The part where I fully accept that this isn't just a chapter. It's a beginning. That realization didn't arrive with fireworks or certainty. It arrived quietly, like dusk settling in without asking permission. I sat with it for a long time, letting it breathe, letting it stop feeling like a revelation and start feeling like a truth. Beginnings are usually painted as bold and dramatic, but this one felt steady, grounded, real in a way I'd never allowed myself to experience before. I thought about the years spent hiding behind humor, behind excuses, behind versions of myself that were easier to explain. None of them were lies exactly, but none of them were complete. What I had learned through all of this wasn't how to become someone else. It was how to stop editing myself down to something smaller just to be acceptable. That understanding settled into my chest like warmth. There will still be hard days. I know that now. Acceptance isn't a finish line you cross once. It's a practice. Some mornings I'll still hesitate before the mirror. Some nights I'll still replay conversations in my head. But the difference is this. I no longer confuse fear with truth. I no longer assume discomfort means I'm doing something wrong.